Artificial Frontier Podcast.
Welcome to the Depth Dive, everybody. Today we're going to be cracking open a book called Simulacra and Simulation
by Baudrillard.
That's right. And we are going to be taking a deep dive into it and seeing if we can pull out some golden nuggets from this admittedly dense material. I think it's going to be an interesting one, though, because it's going to make us question really everything we think we know about reality.
Yeah, I mean, at its core, Baudrillard's argument is that we've moved beyond, just sort of imitation or duplication. We've moved into an era where signs actually replace reality.
So are we like living in the Matrix?
Yes, sort of. I mean, it's the map becoming more real than the territory itself.
Oh, okay.
And so one of the key concepts that I think we can use to kind of understand this is the idea of the hyperreal. So the hyperreal is basically this simulated reality that becomes more real than real.
Okay, I need a real world example here because I'm already starting to get a little lost.
Sure. So, I mean, think about, Instagram, right?
Yeah.
Think about those perfectly curated lives, the flawless selfies, the envy-inducing vacation pictures.
Yeah.
Are those truly real? Or are they a version of reality that's been filtered and edited to seem more perfect, more desirable than actual life?
Right. So it's almost like we're constantly comparing ourselves to these idealized versions of people that don't even actually exist.
Yeah, and Baudrillard, he uses Disneyland as a good example of this too.
What does Disneyland have to do with this?
Well, he says that Disneyland, with its, meticulously crafted fantasy world, actually masks the fact that America surrounding it is already a kind of Disneyland.
So you're saying that the line between fantasy and reality is so blurred that we can't even tell the difference anymore?
Right. And this fear of images sort of overshadowing or eclipsing reality, that's not really anything new.
Okay.
If we think back to, the historical conflict between the iconolators.
Okay, remind me who those guys were again.
Sure. So, iconoclasts, they wanted to destroy religious images because they feared that people would end up worshiping the image itself rather than what it symbolized.
Oh, yeah.
And the iconolators, of course, believed in the power of images to kind of connect us to the divine.
So it's almost like they were worried about people getting lost in the simulation, like forgetting that the image is just a representation and not the real deal.
Right. And this really kind of ties into another key concept here. And that's the death of the real.
The death of the real. Okay.
So Baudrillard argues that in our attempts to preserve or recreate the real, we ironically end up destroying it.
Okay. How do you destroy something by trying to preserve it? I need an example.
Okay. Well, let's take the example of the Tatane tribe, right? Anthropologists kind of presented them to the world as this sort of, primitive society, untouched by modernity.
Like putting them in a zoo?
In a sense, yeah. Their way of life was preserved, for observation and study. But this act of preservation, of placing them under this sort of anthropological lens, fundamentally altered their authentic way of life.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So it's almost like when you catch a butterfly and you pin it to a board to preserve it, it's no longer the same living, breathing creature?
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's not just about isolated tribes, right? This applies to even our grandest attempts to preserve the past, like, the lengths we go to preserve the mummy of Ramses II.
Pharaoh.
Yeah. We all this cutting edge science to try to stop it from decaying. But I mean, think about it. The mummy was meant to exist, in the darkness of the tomb, in this slow, natural process of decomposition. By bringing it into the light, by displaying it in a museum. We've subjected it to a different order, one that ultimately leads to its decay and death in a way it wasn't meant for.
Okay, so we're essentially destroying what we're trying to save, all in the name of preserving the real. Okay, so how does this whole idea of the death of the real apply to, like, politics or history?
Yeah. Well, Baudrillard argues that even historical events have become kind of staged spectacles lacking real impact.
But wait a minute, are you saying that, like, presidential elections or wars are just staged events?
Well, I wouldn't say they don't matter. What Baudrillard is saying is that the impact of these events is diminished by the carefully constructed spectacle around them. So take, for example, presidential assassinations, or at least the threat of them.
All right.
He suggests that they're a way to simulate a threat to power that doesn't really exist. a way to create a dramatic narrative that ultimately reinforces the existing power structures.
Okay, I'm following you. What about like the Vietnam War?
The Vietnam War. Yeah, well, Baudrillard actually sees the Vietnam War as a kind of defining moment, an event that, in his view, sealed the what he calls the end of history.
Hold on, the end of history? What does that even mean?
He's arguing that the war, regardless of who won in the traditional sense, it actually served to eliminate any radical alternatives to the dominant system.
So the Vietnam War actually strengthened the very system it appeared to challenge.
Exactly. It's like the war acted as a pressure valve, a way to release tension and ultimately strengthen the existing order.
Okay. And we haven't even gotten to like the media yet.
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms, I think.
Yeah. Where do we go from here? What other mind-bending concepts does Baudrillard have in store for us?
Well, there's one that's I think a little tricky to grasp, but it's really thought-provoking. It's what he calls the obscenity of the remainder.
The obscenity of the remainder. Okay. Is this like philosophical leftovers or something?
Not quite, though I like the analogy. Basically, it's this idea that anytime we try to categorize or define the world, right, there's always going to be something left over, something that doesn't fit neatly into our systems of meaning.
So it's like the stuff that falls between the cracks, the things we don't know what to do with.
Yeah, exactly. And Baudrillard, he calls this remainder obscene because it kind of disrupts, our carefully constructed order.
So it's not that these leftover bits are like, actually dirty or anything. It's that they don't fit into our need for everything to be neat and tidy.
Exactly. It's like, think about, that junk drawer everyone has. You try to organize your life, create these neat categories, but there's always going to be that handful of, random stuff that defies classification.
I know exactly what you mean. Okay. So how does this remainder thing, how does it connect to like bigger issues or ideas?
Well, think about our ideas about, life and death. We see them as opposites, right?
Yeah, pretty clear cut.
But what about those in-between states like comas or near-death experiences? They kind of disrupt our tidy categories, make us a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure. It's like they're reminding us that maybe we don't have it all figured out.
Yeah, that our neat little boxes don't always capture the complexity of reality.
Okay, I'm with you so far. But how does this all connect back to like literature?
Well, this is where things get really interesting, I think. We can't really talk about Baudrillard without mentioning G.G. Ballard's novel Crash.
Crash. Okay, I've heard of that, but I haven't actually read it. What's the deal with this book?
It's a pretty intense read, I'll say that, but it's a prime example of a world consumed by simulation where technology and death and desire all kind of become intertwined in this really disturbing but also fascinating way.
Okay, so like what kind of stuff actually happens in this book? I'm a little curious, but also a little scared to ask.
Well, the main character, he's obsessed with staging and photographing car crashes.
Oh, wow.
He sees them as this perverse art form, this way to explore the limits of the human body and its relationship to technology.
That's pretty dark.
Yeah. But, Ballard's not just trying to shock us, right?
Yeah.
He's showing us how technology has become so intertwined with our lives that it's almost impossible to separate the two.
So like, how we're constantly plugged in, how we rely on our devices for everything.
Exactly. And in Crash, the car becomes this really potent symbol of this fusion, right? This space where the boundaries between, our bodies and technology and death all kind of collapse.
I'm starting to see how this all ties together. It's like we've become so used to living in this world mediated by machines and images that we've kind of lost touch with the real, the physical, the messy parts of being human.
Yeah. And this loss of touch, this immersion in the simulated world, is what Baudrillard calls the mode of disappearance.
The mode of disappearance. That sounds kind of ominous. Like, what's disappearing exactly?
No, it's more than just the disappearance of meaning or reality.
Yeah.
It's a shift in our entire focus.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Baudrillard argues that we've moved from a society centered on production to one obsessed with disappearance.
So instead of like making things, we're more focused on watching them vanish.
Yeah, think about how quickly technology becomes obsolete, how trends come and go, how information is constantly being updated and revised.
It's like everything is in this constant state of flux, like on the verge of disappearing.
Exactly. And that's really what Baudrillard is getting at with this this whole idea of the mode of disappearance.
So if this is the defining feature of our age, I mean, what does it mean for us? What are the implications of all this?
That's a big question, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Baudrillard, he's not big on giving us easy answers.
Oh, man. So he's not like giving us the cheat codes to escape the Matrix or anything?
No cheat codes. But he is, he's giving us something maybe even more valuable. He's giving us a challenge.
Okay, a challenge. I like that. What kind of challenge are we talking about here?
He's challenging us to wake up and see the world for what it is. This complex interplay of images, signs, simulations, all these things that shape our perceptions and experiences.
So like the first step to resisting the hyperreal is just to become aware of it.
Yeah, to recognize its power, to understand how it creates this sense of hyperreality that can mask the true nature of things.
Okay. I'm on board with that. But let's say, I've woken up, I've taken the red pill. Now what? How do I actually resist this force? It seems pretty all-encompassing.
Well, stay tuned because we're about to get into all that.
All right, deep divers, welcome back. So we've been talking about all this crazy stuff, signs becoming more real than reality, the media, feeding this whole simulation thing. And then there's that whole disappearance thing, right? Like it's just kind of fading away, even as we're trying to hold on to it.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. But I think the big question that we're left with is, is there any way to resist this? Or are we all just, stuck in this hyper-real world, destined to become what Baudrillard calls those living phantoms?
Yeah, exactly. Like, is there a way out? Can we take the blue pill and just, go back to blissful ignorance? Or, if we're stuck with the red pill, what do we do with it?
Well, Baudrillard, he doesn't really give us a step-by-step guide or a set of rules to follow to escape the Matrix. But what he does offer is a challenge.
Okay, a challenge. I'm up for it. What kind of challenge?
He's challenging us to really wake up and see the world for what it is, to understand how these images and signs and simulations, how they shape our perception, how they influence how we see things, how we experience the world.
So it's kind of like the first step is just being aware of it, right? Recognizing that this is happening all around us.
Yeah, I think so. Once you see it, once you become aware of it, it's hard to unsee it. And then the question becomes, okay, well, what do you do with that awareness?
Right. So let's say I've woken up, I've seen the Matrix. What do I do next? How do I actually resist this whole thing?
Well, one thing Baudrillard suggests is that we need to find ways to kind of disrupt the system, to challenge the narratives that shape our perception. He talks a lot about the importance of irony and playfulness and finding ways to kind of subvert the meanings of signs and symbols.
So it's not about throwing away our phones and running off to live in a cabin in the woods.
No, not necessarily. You could do that if you want.
Right.
But I think it's more about recognizing that we're not just passive consumers of this simulated reality. We're active participants in its creation. And if we have the power to create it, then we also have the power to change it.
Okay, so how do we do that? What does that look like in real life?
Well, think about art that challenges our assumptions about beauty or meaning, or humor that kind of pokes fun at the absurdity of our everyday lives, or social movements that try to disrupt the power structures that are in place.
So it's about finding those cracks in the simulation, those moments where the illusion kind of breaks down and we can see something else, something more real.
Exactly. It's about creating those moments of disruption, of rupture, where we can kind of step outside the hyperreal and reclaim our agency, our individuality, our humanity.
I love that. That's a really powerful idea. So it sounds like Baudrillard, he's not just critiquing modern society. He's actually proposing a new way of thinking, a new way of being in the world.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It's a way of thinking that embraces the paradoxical, the playful, the subversive. He even talks about a pataphysics of simulacra.
A pat of what now? You lost me there.
Yeah, it's a mouthful, I know. But basically, it's this idea of embracing the absurdity of it all. Think about a world where gravity works in reverse, or time flows backward. It's like a playful rebellion against the rules of our simulated reality.
So it's like using the simulation's own tools against itself, kind of turning its logic on its head and creating something new, something unexpected.
Exactly. It's about finding the humor in the absurd, the beauty in the broken, the meaning in the meaningless. It's a way of saying, yes, we live in a world of simulation, but that doesn't mean we have to be its slaves.
I really like that. That's a really empowering way to think about it. You know, it's not an easy path, but it's a way to kind of like take back control, to be more than just a passive observer in this whole simulation game.
Yeah, and I think, at the end of the day, that's really what Baudrillard is trying to do with his work. He's trying to wake us up, to get us to question everything, to not be afraid to play with the rules of the game.
Well, I think he's definitely succeeded in doing that for me. I need to go back and reread this book like 5 more times to really wrap my head around it all. But I definitely feel like I've got a whole new perspective on things.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
Thanks for joining us on this crazy, mind-bending journey, deep divers. And until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.
Artificial Frontier Podcast.